You know that feeling you get when someone gets right up in your personal space? That deep gut feeling that says, hey, back up. This is my bubble. Well, that's one of the most basic human instincts we have. It's a silent, invisible contract that lets us all coexist. But what happens when someone doesn't just bump into that bubble, but tries to pop it?
Just imagine for a second that you wake up and your neighbor's fence is suddenly slicing through your garden. Or a huge company starts sending you threatening letters, trying to bully you off the land your family has owned for generations. See, this isn't just about dirt and grass. It's about your safety, your memories, your entire sense of place. This kind of crime has a name: usurpation. And today, we are going to pull it apart and see exactly how it works. All right, so here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off with the big idea of property itself. Then we'll dive into the two main ways this crime happens: the loud way with force and the quiet way with stealth. After that, we'll look at the price you pay for getting caught, and we'll wrap up by talking about why these rules are so incredibly important. Ready? Let's get into it. Okay, before we start throwing around legal articles and jargon, we need to get on the same page about a really huge concept. These laws we're about to discuss, they aren't just some boring text in a dusty book. They're the official rules for an idea that's older than writing itself. The simple, powerful idea of saying, this piece of the world, this is mine. It's one of the cornerstones of civilization. I want you to think about society like it's one giant, complicated board game. Your property, whether it's a house, a farm, or a storefront, that's your main game piece. But here's the thing. That piece is totally useless unless every other player on the board agrees to one simple rule. You don't mess with other people's pieces. And that's exactly what property law is. It's the official rulebook. It's a social contract where we all promise to respect each other's space so we can all play the game. Usurpation, that's when someone decides they don't care about the rules, flips the whole board over, and just takes your stuff.
So let's talk about the most obvious, in-your-face kind of usurpation first. This is the crime of the bully, the person who just takes what they want. And it's all laid out for us in Article 312, which is all about taking property by using brute force.
Okay, let's break this down, because the wording here is super specific and really important. It doesn't just say stealing land. It points to two specific weapons the criminal uses: violence or intimidation. And it's not just protecting the land itself, the real property, but also the real rights that go along with it. And that little difference is huge. Let's unpack that.
You know, pretty much every crime can be broken down into a few key pieces. There's the action itself. That's what the lawyers call the actus reus. Then there's the person who did it, the offender. And finally, there's the damage they caused. If we look at each piece of the puzzle, we can really understand the whole picture.
So what is this actus reus? It's just a fancy Latin term for the forbidden action. It's the physical doing of the crime. We're talking about someone putting up a fence on your lawn, changing the locks on a building they don't own, or just setting up camp on a piece of land and flat out refusing to move. It's the actual physical move that gets the legal ball rolling.
Now, Article 312 says the offender has to use one of two tools from their toolbox. First, you've got violence. That's pretty straightforward, right? Smashing a lock, physically pushing someone off their own property, or hiring security guards to block the driveway. It's loud, it's aggressive, it's obvious. But then there's intimidation. This is the threat of violence. Imagine a big shot developer sending letters to a small farm owner that say something like, this is a dangerous area. It'd be a real shame if something unfortunate were to happen to your crops. Nobody's been touched, but the threat is hanging in the air. The law is smart enough to know that sometimes the shadow of violence is just as effective as the real thing.
So what about those real rights we mentioned? This is where it gets really interesting. It's not just about stealing a chunk of land. It's about stealing the whole bundle of legal powers that come with it. You can steal ownership, obviously, but you could also usurp a lease. Think of a landlord illegally kicking out a tenant to move in themselves. Or you could block what's called an easement. Imagine your neighbor's property is the only way you can get to the main road. If they build a wall to block you, they haven't stolen your land, but they have stolen your right to pass through. So it's about hijacking the use, the access, and the legal privileges of a place. And who can be the offender here? Who's the bad guy? Well, the law keeps it simple: any person. That's it. This means it's not just some faceless corporation. It could be your neighbor, a family member, a business partner, literally anyone who uses these bully tactics to take control of something that isn't theirs. And the harm this causes? It's like a ripple effect. Yeah, there's the financial loss, but it goes so much deeper. It's a violation of one of our most basic rights. The violence can cause actual physical injury, of course. But the intimidation, that causes a deep emotional wound. The constant fear and stress of being threatened in the one place you're supposed to feel safe.
Okay, so we've covered the physical act, the what, but the law is also really interested in the why. Now we have to look inside the criminal's mind. We're talking about intent, the surrounding situation, and the arguments someone might make to defend themselves.
And that brings us to another one of those great legal phrases, mens rea. It literally translates to guilty mind. See, for it to be a crime, it's not enough to just be on someone's land. The offender has to know they're not supposed to be there, and they have to intend to use force or threats to stay. This is the key difference between an honest mistake, like say you hire a surveyor who messes up and you accidentally build your fence 5 feet onto your neighbor's yard, and a calculated criminal plan to take what you know isn't yours. It's all about intent.
The law also knows that context is everything. Think of it like the scales of justice. Some things, called aggravating factors, make the crime worse and tip the scales toward a harsher penalty, like using extreme violence or targeting an elderly person. But other things, mitigating factors, can lessen the severity. Maybe the person showed remorse or tried to give the property back. Justice isn't black and white. It's all about weighing these details.
Of course, there are two sides to every story, and an accused person has the right to defend themselves. They might try to argue they had a lawful claim, maybe from some old forgotten deed. Or they could claim it was that honest mistake we talked about. Or they might just attack the core of the accusation and say, hey, prove it. There was no force. There were no threats. The court's job is to sift through all of it and figure out what really happened. So we've spent some time with the bully, the one who uses brute force. But usurpation has another face, a second personality. This one is quieter, sneakier. This is the trickster, who works in the shadows. And that brings us to our second major type of this crime.
And this is where Article 313 comes in. If Article 312 was a loud, hostile takeover, then Article 313 is a silent coup. It's a crime not of force, but of deception, of secretly changing the very lines on the map.
The language here is super direct. The crime isn't taking possession of the land. It's the simple act of altering the markers themselves. We're talking about everything from an ancient stone monument that has marked a town line for centuries to a simple metal post in a suburban backyard. This law is all about protecting the integrity of those physical lines. So what's the forbidden act, the actus reus, this time? It's just moving the marker. That's it. Think of it this way. Property boundaries are like a giant public document that we all have to trust. This crime is like secretly going into that document with an eraser and a pen and changing a fundamental fact for your own benefit. It's messing with reality. And here's a really critical detail. The crime is considered complete the instant the marker is moved on purpose. It doesn't matter if it's 1 tiny inch or a whole mile. You can just picture it, right? A farmer, late at night, when no one is looking, who nudges a boundary stone just 6 inches over into his neighbor's field. He does it again the next year and the year after that. According to the law, each one of those tiny 6-inch moves was a brand new completed crime. The harm this causes is so sneaky. One moved line might seem small, but it plants the seed for future arguments and legal battles. On a bigger scale, it can even cause massive disputes between towns or provinces. But the deepest, most corrosive harm is to our trust. If we can't trust the physical markers on the ground, then the whole system we use to record who owns what starts to fall apart. All right, we have fully dissected these crimes. We've met the bully and the trickster. So what happens when they get caught? What's the price? Because the law isn't just about saying what's wrong. It's about making sure there's a real consequence. Let's talk justice by the numbers. For the bully, the one who uses force, the main penalty hits them right in the wallet. It's designed to make the crime completely unprofitable. If the court can figure out how much money the offender made, say by illegally collecting rent, the fine will be between 50 and 100% of that profit. The law basically says, we're taking everything you made from this and then some. Oh, and if there was violence involved, that can mean a whole separate set of criminal charges on top of everything else.
But what if you can't really put a dollar amount on the gain? What if there was no clear profit? Well, the law doesn't just shrug its shoulders. It still brings the hammer down. In those cases, the fine can go all the way up to 100,000 pesos. The message is clear. There will be a penalty. And this range you see, from 40,000 up to 100,000 pesos, that's really important. It gives the judge flexibility. It allows them to look at all the specifics. How much violence was there? How vulnerable was the victim? How did the offender act? And then tailor the punishment to fit the unique details of the crime. Now, for our trickster, the person who moves the boundary lines, the court gets a sort of menu of punishments to choose from. They can go with a short prison sentence, up to 30 days. They can issue a fine of up to 20,000 pesos, or if the case is particularly bad, they can do both. That flexibility is key to making sure the punishment fits the crime.
Okay, we have been way down in the legal weeds looking at articles and penalties, but let's zoom all the way out for the big finish. Why does any of this stuff really matter? Because at the end of the day, these laws aren't just about land, they're about the trust that holds our society together.
This, right here, is the heart of it all. A boundary line isn't just a mark on the ground. It is a physical symbol of a promise. It's a promise that says, I won't interfere with your world, and you won't interfere with mine. It's that promise that gives us the security to build our lives, our homes, and our businesses. And these laws against usurpation are basically society shouting, we will enforce that promise.
And think about this. We've been talking about laws and ideas that are centuries old, but they have never been more relevant than they are right now. We focused on physical land, but what does usurpation look like in the 21st century? If someone hijacks your social media account and locks you out, is that a new form of this crime? If a hacker alters the code of a digital asset, is that just a new way of moving a boundary marker? These ancient laws give us the blueprint, but our biggest challenge now is figuring out how to apply them to a world where our most valuable property might not exist on any physical map at all.